Testing DNA with a cheek swab and online kit has been popular for a number of years, but there could be unintended consequences for what happens to your estate if that information goes public. Doris Bonora is a wills and estates lawyer and a partner at Denton's in Edmonton. She joins us now as part of our regular Wise Counsel legal column. Good morning, Doris, and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, you heard us talking about The Simpsons earlier.
I did.
And Tara had referenced the Stonecutters episode. Did that tweak something?
It sure did, because Marge said, oh, but you're, part of our little clan of 5. But what if suddenly someone shows up and says, oh, no, you're not 5 anymore because I'm your child too. So this is really, Mark, only a problem for men, right? Because women tend to know which children they've had.
Yeah, I would think.
But for men, if they've had some fun, and I'm not talking about, delinquent men or men who are shrinking their responsibilities, sometimes they just don't know. They've never been told that they had a child.
Yeah. Now, how big a risk is it then for people to test their DNA and then share the results publicly?
Well, always we recommend you protect your privacy. But actually, so if you decide to share your information because you're not worried about it and maybe you're just looking for some Scottish relatives to go have fun in a pub with that are you never knew about, not so much a problem. But really what happens, and the downside comes from family members becoming basically genetic informants on the rest of their family.
Okay.
So, you put your DNA out, and then now somebody realizes they're a long-lost relative, and it's that link that has led to many problems. So
now, you've actually had a case where this has been a problem. Can you tell us about that?
Right. So we had this man who had dementia and really didn't know what was going on. His family was taking care of him. And then this woman came along and said, I've done my DNA testing and I tested positive, and we'll call him Fred for ease. So Fred's brother, and Fred had 2 brothers. So she asked the brothers if they would test their DNA to see if if they were her father, and they said no. And so then she went to Fred's family, and they said, he has dementia, and she said, oh, I want to have a relationship, but of course you're not going to have a relationship with someone who has dementia. So she actually snuck into his facility and took a swab.
What?
Of course, so wrong, to get this DNA testing done. And ultimately, despite the fact that she said it was all about the relationship and not about the money, there were lots of court cases and applications about it, and ultimately with some money she did go away and leave this family alone. But that is obviously the dangers, right? It wasn't Fred who put his DNA out there.
No.
It was his brother.
Right, and that is so then the connection was made that way.
Right.
How can people protect their privacy then if it's their family members who are sharing DNA?
You really need to tell your family that DNA testing is wonderful to learn about your ancestry. It's wonderful to learn about your health concerns, but you really should not put it out there in terms of privacy. And although I haven't done mine, I understand that if you did a 23andMe, it's just the tiniest question in the smallest box to say, don't share this privately. And of course, we might remember the case of the Golden State Killer.
Right.
So they had his DNA. They had his DNA, the police, in their vaults for decades. And it was only when they thought about using all the public DNA sites that they actually found the person, because then they did match it. No one else in the family was a criminal, so they couldn't match it in their own criminal database.
Right.
But ultimately, when they did the public database, they narrowed the killer down to one family versus millions of people in the Golden State area.
Yeah, that was an amazing story. Now, what about people who were adopted and then find their birth parents? Would they have any rights to challenge the will of the birth parent if they end up finding them through DNA testing?
So interesting, a thing that lots of people don't know about adopted children is that their birth certificate actually changes. So they are no longer, obviously you can't change your birth parent necessarily, but in law, they are no longer your parents. So we're not so worried about adopted children. But what we are worried about is in many wills, people will say, after my spouse dies, I leave everything to my children, and they don't name them.
Okay.
So then the question is, in the event that you didn't know that you had a child, and now you're like Fred, you can't change your will because you have dementia, the question would be, would you have included this child if you knew about them? So what would your intention have been? And so we're worried about those will challenges. And as we were in Fred's case, that this child might come along and be included in his will because he hadn't actually named his children. So that's probably one of the lessons today, is to say, don't just use a generic reference to your children, but actually name them in your will,
right,
so that we have a greater intention about who you wanted to include.
Are there any other legal concerns that could arise out of DNA testing?
So there's lots of stories out there about the fact that then your medical information is out there. It allows insurance companies to know about your health issues that are in the future. Not the insurance company asks you about your current health, but if you do DNA testing and now you might be susceptible to cancer or other diseases, which we don't know if you're going to get, they could refuse you insurance. So that is a big problem, and it's happened in the U.S. where employers have asked for your DNA or looked at your DNA testing to see if you're going to be a problem health person in the future. So there are lots of things that can happen when you decide to release your privacy. So the big lesson is keeping your privacy and telling your family to keep privacy.
Right. So mark that check mark. Do not want it shared publicly.
That's right. That's right. There. So, you're not going to go for drinks in the pub with your Scottish relatives, but it's better than being that genetic informant.
Absolutely. Doris, fascinating stuff. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me on.
Doris Bonora is a wills and estates lawyer and partner at Denton's in Edmonton.